In the heart of the 14th century, a time when kings and dukes wielded power like thunderbolts, the world was a place of stark contrasts. While the nobility lived in opulent castles, the common folk toiled in the fields, their backs bent under the weight of relentless labor. But this was no ordinary time. The ground beneath the feet of the powerful began to tremble, and the whispers of rebellion grew louder, turning into a roar that echoed through the streets of Paris, Rouen, and Ghent. The authority of the lions, the kings and their nobles, was challenged as never before. It was a time of upheaval, a time when the poor, the merchants, and the commoners dared to dream of a world where they, too, could have a say in their fate. The year was 1358, and France was in turmoil. The 100 Years' War between England and France had drained the kingdom's resources, leaving the people impoverished and the government weakened. The burden of taxes, the constant demands for military service, and the lack of food and basic necessities pushed the commoners to the brink. In Paris, a group of merchants, led by Etienne Marcel, seized control of the city, demanding reforms and an end to the abuses of power by the nobility. They hoped to create a new order, one where the merchants and the common people could share in the governance of the city. But the king, Charles V, and his nobles were not about to give up their power so easily. The uprising in Paris was met with swift and brutal force. The king's armies, led by loyal nobles, crushed the rebellion, and Etienne Marcel was killed. Paris did not regain a provost of merchants for 30 years, and the city's autonomy was greatly reduced. In Rouen, the situation was even worse. The Herelle, a popular uprising, was brutally suppressed, and the city never recovered the liberties it had once enjoyed. The state had no organized forces to meet the challenge of revolution, but when the nobles finally acted, their response was as formalized and ritualistic as a ceremonial rite. The poor, who had provided the explosive force of the uprising, became the agents of the merchant class, whose interests were not aligned with theirs. The towns, each vying for their own interests, became their own enemies, and the insurgency could not maintain its grip. Ghent, a city in Flanders, managed to hold out for 2 more years. The city's struggle continued until the death of Louis de Maille, the Count of Flanders. His successor, the Duke of Burgundy, restored the city's liberties to consolidate his rule. Elsewhere, the communal liberties and autonomy of the towns were lost or reduced. The process that had operated in Etienne Marcel's revolt continued. To the extent that the towns lost, the monarchy gained, and through financial support, the crown increasingly made partners of the nobility. The lower class, once seen as a passive and unthreatening element of society, was now viewed with suspicion and fear. Their role as a dynamic force in society was recognized, but not necessarily in a positive light. Therefore, the innocent must die of hunger with whom these great wolves daily fill their maw, wrote Deschamps, a poet of the time. This grain, this corn, what is it but the blood and bones of the poor folk who have plowed the land? Wherefore their spirit crieth on God for vengeance. Woe to the lords, the councillors, and all who steer us thus, and woe to all who are of their party, for no man careth now but to fill his bags. Despite the wave of insurrection, the condition of the working class remained largely unchanged. The inertia of history weighed heavily against any significant transformation. It would take another 400 years before the descendants of the Neapolitans, the rebels of the 14th century, would rise up again, this time to storm the Bastille and bring about the French Revolution. But the story of the 14th century is not just one of rebellion and suppression. It is also a story of ambition and the lure of power, particularly in the realm of Italy. The Kingdom of Naples, a land of beauty and culture, was a prize that many sought to claim. The Duc d'Anjou, a member of the French royal family, set his sights on Naples, hoping to establish a foothold in Italy. From the moment he crossed the Alps in 1382, the Angevin claim to the Kingdom of Naples drew France southward, creating a pattern of intervention that would persist for centuries. The Kingdom of Naples, under the rule of the Angevin dynasty, had been a jewel of the Mediterranean. King Robert, known as the New Solomon, had presided over a reign of peace and prosperity, where commerce flourished and the arts thrived. Boccaccio, one of the greatest writers of the time, preferred the happy, peaceful, generous, and magnificent Naples to his native Florence, which he found devoured by innumerable cares. The city was a center of culture, with its castle, Castel Nuovo, a symbol of the Angevin rule. Nobles and merchants built palazzos, and Tuscan artists filled them with frescoes and sculpture. The roads were secure, and the currency was stable. But all of this changed after the death of King Robert in 1343. Robert's granddaughter, Queen Joanna, inherited a kingdom in turmoil. Her 4 ill-fated marriages brought conflict and instability, culminating in the Papal Schism, a split in the Catholic Church that pitted Pope Clement against Pope Urban. Queen Joanna, siding with Clement, named the Duc d'Anjou her heir, a move that enraged Urban, who declared her deposed and crowned Charles of Durazzo, a distant relative, as the rightful king of Naples. Charles, a small, fair-haired man known for his courage and geniality, did not let his good nature stand in the way of his ambitions. He defeated Joanna's forces, imprisoned her, and had her strangled in prison. Her body left exposed in the cathedral for 6 days to ensure no doubt of her death. The Duc d'Anjou, determined to claim his right to the throne, crossed into Italy with a large army. He was joined by notable lords, including the Green Count of Savoy, Amedeo, who brought 1,100 lances and a retinue adorned in green, a color that symbolized his commitment to the cause. Anjou's expedition was funded by the Visconti of Milan, who provided a large portion of the funds in exchange for the betrothal of Anjou's young son, Louis, to Bernabo Visconti's daughter, Lucia. The adventure was one of splendor and ambition, with the knights and nobles riding in plumed helmets and sumptuous armor, dreaming of spreading the sweet perfume of glory of the lilies of France. However, the journey was fraught with challenges. As Anjou's army passed through the Apennine Mountains, they were attacked by Highland brigands, losing much of their treasure and supplies. Charles of Durazzo, fortified in Castelnuovo, avoided direct confrontation, forcing Anjou to move his forces in search of a battle that never came. By the time Anjou reached the outskirts of Naples, his army was in dire straits, and the death of Amedeo of Savoy in February 1383 dealt a significant blow to the expedition. Foiled and hungry, Anjou's forces retreated to the heel of Italy, where they huddled in misery, selling their precious possessions to buy provisions. The resplendent hauberk, once a symbol of Anjou's wealth and power, was sold, and he wore a simple cloth with fleur-de-lis painted in yellow. The once proud war horses, now emaciated, could barely move, and the men, once filled with dreams of glory, were reduced to eating rabbit stew and barley bread. Back in France, Anjou's pleas for support fell on deaf ears. The council, preoccupied with the English invasion, was reluctant to send aid. It was not until after the suppression of the Paris uprising that the crown, with a replenished treasury, agreed to provide 190,000 francs to finance a supplementary campaign under the command of Enguerrand de Coucy. But the English invasion of Flanders, led by Henry de Spencer, the Bishop of Norwich, once again diverted attention and resources. The English raid, financed through dubious means and characterized by the withholding of sacraments and indulgences, was a scandal that further eroded the moral authority of the Church and fueled the protests of the Lollards, a growing movement of religious dissent. The 14th century was a time of great upheaval, a time when the old order was challenged and the new order struggled to take shape. The rebellions in France, the struggles for power in Italy, and the religious conflicts of the time all contributed to a world in flux. The common people, the merchants, and the nobles all played their parts in this drama, each seeking their own advantage in a world that was changing, but not always for the better. The legacy of this period is a complex one, marked by both progress and regression, by the rise of new ideas and the persistence of old ones. It is a reminder that history is not a straight line, but a winding path, full of twists and turns, where the future is never certain and the past is always present.